So in this video, we will focus on third wave cognitive behavioral therapy. So again, this is these last 2 points on our timeline with DBT and ACT. Third wave CBT is also called mindfulness and acceptance-based cognitive therapies. And they were very influenced by Buddhist traditions. However, they're often used by therapists who do not have any explicit religious ties. And the part of it that comes from Buddhist traditions is this very big focus on mindfulness. And mindfulness is a word that gets thrown around a lot. If you would like to try to kind of define it, feel free and drop in a comment and tell me kind of like what you think of mindfulness. Some of the common definitions might include being able to pay attention in the present moment to whatever arises internally or externally without becoming entangled or hooked by judging or wishing that things were otherwise. Another definition might say an innate human capacity to deliberately pay full attention to where we are, to our actual experience, and to learn from it. This can be contrasted with living on automatic pilot and going throughout our day without really being there. Another definition says that the short definition is a combination of awareness, present experience, and with acceptance. And lastly, another definition might say that mindfulness is the awareness that arises out of intentionally attending in an open and discerning way to whatever is arising in the present moment. So some of the commonalities across these definitions are just this ability to be in the moment, to be aware without judging what is going on. And so I like to think about this as kind of the sunset mode of mind. So think about the last time you saw the sunset. You probably were not trying to figure out the sunset. You probably were not trying to change the sunset. My guess is that you were just taking it in. You were looking at the lights, the colors, maybe feeling how the air felt when you were looking at it. You were probably feeling pretty in the moment. And this can happen pretty easily for us when we're looking at these things that we consider beautiful. So the ocean, nature is often where people feel mindful kind of in a more natural way. However, we can take this approach and apply it to all sorts of different situations. And this can take practice. So it might be easy to slip into this mode of thinking when you're in a situation that's like overwhelming and kind of forces a present moment, such as the sunset. But can you take that approach when you're sitting there with anxiety, when you're about to go give a class presentation? You can imagine that's a lot more difficult, but it is something that can be learned. And this is one of the focuses of third wave cognitive behavioral therapy. And so another definition of mindfulness that I like that's very concise is just this: you're fully engaged in a non-confrontational way. So rather than engaging in experiential avoidance, which is kind of avoiding that full experience by either distracting yourself or thinking about something else or controlling it. So you're not trying to change the way you're feeling or thinking, or you're not trying to change your external circumstances. You are just engaging in it and accepting it for how it is because you're not trying to change it. In psychotherapy, what this looks like is allowing internal experiences, so thoughts and feelings, to run their course without fighting them. So you can imagine this is very different from that traditional CBT that we talked about in the last video, because now the goal is to change how a person relates to their thoughts and feelings rather than actually changing the thoughts and feelings themselves. So with Beck and Ellis and cognitive restructuring, we are literally teaching people how they can change their thoughts so that they can change their feelings. And this can be a very useful tool in a lot of situations. But you can imagine there are situations in which changing your thoughts isn't really going to matter in the big picture because somebody is going to be in the same situation. Or maybe their thoughts are negative, but they are actually reasonable and appropriate to the situation. So this is where this more acceptance-based approach can be really helpful. But it takes practice and willingness to be mindful towards unpleasant experiences. So like I said, it's pretty easy to be, mindful and when you're just like at the beach at sunset and you're just taking it all in. It takes a lot more practice and willingness to be uncomfortable to take that approach towards, having a bad mood or an unpleasant situation. So one example that is commonly used in these third wave therapies is something called urge surfing. And this is often used for anything that has kind of an addictive quality to it. So it might be used in substance use treatment, can also be used for things like OCD if somebody has the urge to engage in a compulsion like washing their hands, or even anxiety if someone has the urge to avoid an anxiety-provoking situation. And the idea here is that we maybe can't just change our urges. Maybe we can try cognitive restructuring, just kind of see if the way we change how we think can change how we feel. But maybe we're just going to crave something or have the urge to do something. And so the goal here is to instead kind of ride the wave. This is why it's called urge surfing, and wait for those thoughts and feelings to subside. And so you can kind of think of it as like a wave that's like rising and building up, and then it's going to crest and the urge will eventually go away. And the big message here is that thoughts and feelings do not necessitate action. And this is the big message that you're going to try to teach your clients. This is also often very useful when treating self-harm, actually. So oftentimes the pattern of somebody who self-harms is that they will feel very, very bad. They feel very extreme levels of distress. And by kind of interrupting that high level of distress by causing physical harm, it produces this kind of sense of relief. So for example, cutting oneself is going to kind of interrupt the psychological harm by producing physical harm, and it's going to give this relief. But then that person never learns that the psychological distress will go away on its own. And so urge surfing can be used to really just sit in the feelings and wait, and they will eventually go away. As you can imagine, this is not something you can just like jump into with a brand new client. It's something you kind of build up to and practice, but it is actually very effective. So one of the therapies that might use urge surfing and other mindfulness strategies is dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. DBT was created by Marsha Linehan back in the 1980s, and she specifically developed it to treat women who had borderline personality disorder. And so this is based on a conceptualization that borderline personality disorder is a problem of emotional regulation. And what Marsha Linehan found was that traditional cognitive behavioral strategies and other psychotherapies were not working for these women who were experiencing kind of extreme levels of emotional dysregulation. Teaching cognitive restructuring just simply wasn't working. So some of the core practices in DBT, we have problem solving, which is going to look a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy. We're going to have cognitive restructuring, we're going to have behavioral approaches, and really just kind of like this pragmatic problem solving approach. There's also a lot of validation, and this is going to look a lot like humanistic psychotherapies. But the key part of DBT is the dialectics. So this is why it's called dialectical behavioral therapy. This is acknowledging that we can simultaneously accept the way we are and change. So on the acceptance side, we have mindfulness, which again is focusing on the ability to accept and be present in the current moment. And we also have distress tolerance, which is going to include that like urge surfing approach. And so this is the idea that without changing the way that we feel, we can learn to tolerate negative internal experiences. Rather than trying to escape them with problem behaviors such as substance use or self-harm or avoidance, we can learn to just be with them. However, she doesn't stop with just acceptance because she also notes that we can change. So we can learn emotion regulation skills that do focus on changing the way that we feel and think. There's also a big component of interpersonal effectiveness in DBT. So teaching assertiveness skills, strengthening relationships. And this is because a lot of people with borderline personality disorder have a lot of difficulties in their interpersonal relationships. And Marshall Linehan kind of believed that this is something that people can learn and change and develop better skills for. So the key thing to know about DBT is that it relies on both acceptance and change principles, and that there's kind of these 4 domains that it focuses on. The other type of third wave CBT that we'll talk about is ACT. So this was created by Stephen Hayes in the 1980s, around the same time as DBT. And the goal of ACT is to help clients increase their psychological flexibility and accept their own internal psychological experiences so that they can pursue value-driven actions. So to break this down a little bit, what we mean by internal psychological experiences, that means these negative thoughts and feelings. And the goal here is to simply accept them instead of just trying to change them. What we mean by value-driven actions, to me, is similar to that idea of an ideal self in humanistic psychotherapy. So we want to identify what our values are and pursue behaviors that are in line with our values. ACT is intended to be transdiagnostic. So what this means is that you don't have to have a certain, DSM diagnosis to receive ACT. It's intended to help anyone. And the goal is to treat experiential avoidance, which is this idea that when we have negative thoughts and feelings come up, a lot of us turn to avoiding them. So instead of really sitting with the way you feel, you might go play video games or have a drink or avoid doing your homework instead of, really feeling the anxiety that might be coming up for you. So in ACT, the therapy is often experiential. So we're explicitly dealing with thoughts and feelings in the room. And this is somewhat similar to that psychodynamic or humanistic approach, where we're really wanting to bring up feelings in the therapy room and deal with them then and there, rather than just talking about how things look at a different time. There's also a lot of metaphor use in ACT. And so as one example that helps kind of describe one of the main approaches to ACT is this idea of kids on a bus as being a metaphor for the thoughts that pop up in your mind. So imagine that you're a bus driver and you have a certain route that you need to take. You have destinations you need to go, but you have a lot of rowdy kids on the bus. And so the kids are fighting with each other. They're being loud. They're saying negative things. And imagine if you stop the bus to deal with the kids every time they're being rowdy, you're never going to get to your destination. And this can be a metaphor that's used for if we stop every time we have negative thoughts or feelings, it's going to really get in the way of living our life and achieving our goals. And so the goal of ACT is to be a bus driver who can sit there while the kids are being rowdy and still drive the bus, because you are in charge of your own life. So even if you're experiencing negative thoughts and feelings, you can still choose to engage in the behaviors that you want to do. And so this is an example of a metaphor that's often used to describe that model of ACT and how we can take our negative thoughts and feelings with us and still choose to engage in our goal-directed behaviors. ACT includes a lot of humanistic elements. So back in the humanism chapter, I said that we were kind of going to return to some of those positive psychology elements. And this is really where there is a big focus on values in ACT, as well as self-awareness. However, ACT is very behavioral at its core. So goals are defined in terms of behavior, and a lot of the work is done in the service of helping people achieve behavioral goals. And so this is the model of ACT. We're not going to go into it in a lot of detail. And ACT is a very kind of philosophical psychotherapy. It's pretty complex, but I'll just kind of briefly go over the different aspects of it. So we have acceptance, which is that idea of kind of being able to sit with negative thoughts and feelings and accept them for how they are without trying to change them. This is going to rely on having contact with the present moment. So not ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, but really being there in the present moment. Another area is values, really kind of understanding who you are and what you want in life, and kind of seeing how that manifests in the present moment. And this is going to lead us to this next one, which is called committed action, which is tying our behaviors to our values. So are our actions really committed to reflect the type of person that we want to be? At the bottom, we have self as context, which is kind of an esoteric one. So this is referring to this idea that who you are as a person contains your experiences. So you are not your thoughts. You are the person who watches your thoughts. So you are the context for which all of the things that happen to you in life occur. And this is helpful in helping people really get unhooked from their thoughts. Because sometimes you can experience a thought and it really feels real. But other times you can like notice your thoughts and really notice like, I can't believe I was thinking that. Or, wow, that thought is really unhelpful for me right now. And so this is really helpful to practice, is kind of like noticing when you're like in your thoughts versus when you're watching your thoughts. And the last one that I'll talk about is diffusion, which is that process of getting unhooked from your thoughts. So whether you're really in your thoughts, that is like kind of your full experience and you see your thought as truth, versus watching your thought and being able to kind of assess how useful it is for you. And this all contributes to this idea of psychological flexibility. And so the overall goal of ACT is to increase flexibility by boosting all 6 of these areas. And so we'll spend a little bit more time on values, because I think this is a really helpful area that ACT has really highlighted in modern psychotherapy. And so if we think about what are values? So I think of values as things that can never be achieved. They are directions. So some examples of things that people might value are creativity, stability in life, freedom, achievement, authenticity, community, industry, or kind of like the ability to achieve things in work, courage, loyalty, growth, security. So there are, hundreds of words that can represent values. And you can see how they are really these things that can't really be achieved. You don't achieve creativity, you do things that are creative. And so if values are kind of this compass, this direction that you want to go in life, then our goals are the map markers. And so if your value is creativity, then a goal might be that you complete an art project, or that you draw 3 times a week, or that you engage in creative activities with your friends on a regular basis. And so this brings us to committed actions. So we have values that are linked to goals. And then committed actions are the behaviors that take us towards our goals and values. So, for me, I think in psychology, one of my values is kind of constantly learning. So the ability to grow, let's say. And so my goal is to complete a graduate degree in psychology. And so my committed action is going to be to write my thesis or to take my class. And that could be even broken down further into specific behaviors. So to write my thesis, I need to sit down on my laptop and type on my keyboard. And I need to read an article and include that in my thesis. And so behaviors are these like very small steps that take us towards our goals that are in line with our values. And so ACT really stems from this tradition of what is sometimes called radical behaviorism. And so it really breaks things down into behaviors and relies on those behavioral principles that we discussed last week. And then it also focuses on removing the psychological barriers that get in the way of these behavior changes. So for me to write my thesis, I need to be able to sit at my laptop and I need to think about, so what are all the things that come up for me when I'm trying to do that? What is getting in the way? And this is where ACT can be really helpful. Another video I posted on Perusal this week really focuses on this area and helps to explain how it relates to ACT. And it really focuses on this idea of we are constantly facing choice points in life where we can either go away from our values, and this often occurs when we're like hooked on a thought, like we can't do something or it's impossible, or we can go towards our values. And oftentimes the situation and our thoughts and feelings are really influencing what we choose to do in each of these choice points. So I encourage you to watch that video and add comments on what you think about it and kind of how it maybe differs from some of the other psychotherapy approaches that we've discussed. So looking big picture, there's a lot of empirical support for cognitive therapies, both for the traditional CBT approach with like cognitive restructuring, as well as these kind of more acceptance and mindful-based interventions. And given that cognitive therapy really is rooted in that behavioral movement, a lot of cognitive interventions really lend themselves well to collecting data that can be analyzed in those efficacy studies. So there's a lot of empirical support that these approaches are quite effective for a wide range of treatment areas. And so that is it for this video, and I appreciate everybody taking this course. Just a reminder that your final projects will be due by the end of this week, and I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about that. Thanks, everyone.